Good morning. Get myself live on Instagram. Let's see, go live. Good morning. Welcome back to Fit Body Secrets, where my mission is to bring you guys inspiration, motivation, and a ton of tips to help you guys on your fitness and your fat loss and whatever other health journey you're at. And nutrition is the missing link. That is what I'm here to provide. And today I'm going to keep it simple and I'm going to talk a little bit about macros. And it's funny because as a nutritionist, and it's so hard because there's so many misconceptions about macros, and it just comes down to personality types and so many people being very restrictive and obsessive about numbers. And that can lead to negative connotations about macros. But at the end of the day, macros are a foundational principle of nutrition. So you can't get around them. Any effective diet includes macros in some way, shape, or form, whether they're restricting a specific type of macro or whatnot. Macros are a part of nutrition and the most impactful part of nutrition when we are talking about overall body composition, energy, overall metabolic health. What you're eating, the balance of it is what's going to keep your body healthy. So yes, micronutrients matter, but macros are what matter the most. And today I want to give you guys, I kind of had this broken down into a few different sections. One being a lot of the common mistakes that people are making that are keeping them stuck from making progress. The second one really being more so about like the missing link that a lot of you guys might be missing out on. So you don't want to miss that part. And then some of the adaptations that happen from people who have been chronically living in a calorie deficit from chasing fat loss for too long and only using macros for one purpose, which is to be smaller. So I want to go over that along with leaving you guys a couple of things like some myths and misconceptions and hopefully some takeaways for you to be able to go take back to your plan and apply it. So if you are a macro tracker, or you are somebody that has tried macros in the past, or maybe you've been curious about it and feel a little bit overwhelmed, hopefully today will give you the direction that you need to apply it, because it is probably one of the most impactful things that you will do for your nutrition. If you spend a good 6 months focusing on dialing that stuff in, you have the tools to truly be able to eat for your health for a very long time, if you're doing it the right way, because macros is only one piece of the puzzle. And I don't want to get into the whole pyramid of nutrition and all that kinds of stuff, because I do have other principles. I want to keep this focus on the macro perspective of it, but there are some prerequisites to macro tracking that we can talk about. Things like knowing what good quality food is, knowing the sources of your macros, but a lot of these things that we can kind of do along the process of dialing in the numbers. And that's how I work as a nutritionist. I don't just focus on numbers. I focus more on what is this person eating and how can I get them to balance their plate and balance their meals more to get the right macro split for them for their specific goals. Okay, so let's get into it. I just want to see if anybody here is walking on Instagram. I see a couple people signing in here. Cool, awesome. All right, so we're going to get back to the top of my notes here. One of the things that I wanted to start by talking about today, just as a couple of quick little pieces of insight for you. Did you know that the average person consumes over 3,500 calories per day? And I say that to you because, sorry, thirsty today. I say that to you today because the majority of people that come to me are so calorie phobic, yet they are more active than the average person consuming 3,500 calories per day. So afraid of eating too many calories, yet they are way more active than people that are consuming thousands and thousands of calories while moving less than 20 minutes a day. I'm talking getting 2,000 to 3,000 steps a day, not working out, literally sitting behind a desk all day. So I want you to keep that into perspective as we are talking about macros, because this is going to go into one of the biggest mistakes that people make. And I also want to make a quick little note about the fact that there's a lot of when we're looking at different nutrition strategies, every single plan that you follow is going to have macros as a component of it. You don't necessarily have to be tracking in an app to be tracking your macros. Any person, especially if your goals are body composition, performance, that tells you that they are not tracking macros, they might not be tracking macros in an app, but they are tracking their macronutrients some way, shape, or form. Whether it is they understand what a portion of protein looks like, they know what 40 grams of protein looks like, and they're eating structured, they're eating the same meals and snacks every single day on repeat, or they've done it long enough to be able to make changes to that stuff and knowing when they need to dial it back in. So I wanted to make sure I talked a bit about that. Now, if you are somebody right now, you've been tracking your macros and you feel like progress has stalled, or you've been tracking and you're not making any progress, I want to really break this down for you. And we're going to start by talking about why macros matter. Okay. So first and foremost, your macronutrients, we've got protein, carbs, and fats. These are not all that matter in your nutrition, but they are the most important things. Okay. Your protein intake is what's going to help fuel your muscle growth, making sure that you have enough protein available for immune function. It helps with your recovery. It helps with satiety. It helps keep your tendons and your ligaments strong. We need protein. We need amino acids. So making sure that you're getting enough protein in your diet is very important. Carbohydrates are your body's main source of energy. This is what fuels your day. This is what your body prefers to burn for energy. This is how we perform better in the gym. This is also what supports muscle growth, okay? And then we do need fats. Fats are essential. Your body cannot make fats. We need fats to have healthy hormone function, brain function, and also for recovery, because fats can also bring down inflammation. Tracking your food before we even get into macros is a foundational principle or a foundational way for you to build awareness in what is lacking in your diet and what your nutrition habits are like. Okay, so we need to really make sure that we are looking at tracking our food. Now, a lot of people are like, well, can I just focus on calories? The problem with only focusing on calories, okay, well, a couple of problems, is if you're only focusing on calories, and really if you're only focusing on macro numbers, you get into this number game, and calories is very simple, right? I'm just going to eat 1,500 calories a day or 1,800 calories a day. But if the makeup of those calories aren't in line with what your body needs to perform best, to support the amount of muscle mass that you have, to support the type of training that you have, you're not going to have as good of results. And that's where you can kind of run into issues. So you can be you could be eating the right number of calories, but not getting the right amount of nutrients. That's why balance matters most. So when it comes to getting into macro tracking, the first thing that I want to remind you of is we're really not ever tracking macros or tracking calories. We're always tracking our food. We're tracking our food in some way, shape, or form, whether it's using an app, which makes things super easy and super flexible, or you are someone that's like, I eat 3 meals and 2 snacks, and this is what I look like, because now you have an idea of where your baseline is, and we can make adjustments to that. So we do need to have some kind of a system for tracking your food. So whether it's a plate method or a photo method and things are consistent, or is an app method. The app method is the easiest thing. The hardest thing about the app method is it does require a learning curve in figuring some things out. But once you overcome that, everything else is a lot easier. And my next episode, I am going to talk a little bit about how to make that a little bit easier for you. I'm going to sneeze, I think. Bless me. All right. So let's talk about some things that can go wrong when we are tracking our calories, tracking our food. I'm not even going to call it tracking macros, because at the end of the day, even if you're not perfect on your macros, which we'll talk about, if you're tracking your food appropriately, you should still be making some progress. All right. So here are some common tracking errors. And I'm saying this to you not in a place of judgment or like you're doing things wrong or you're failing. It's literally giving you the things that I see common amongst most people And it's not that you're not working hard. You're just not focusing on the details that matter. Okay. So one of the first things I see is not using a food scale. Okay. If you're tracking your food and you're not using a food scale, start using a food scale. It is a temporary thing. Over time, you will get better at using a food scale. And guess what? Progress happens a lot faster. You also realize how loose your eye might be around certain foods and maybe some foods that you might have been under eating. Okay, so make sure that you are using a food scale. This is the best way to ensure that you are getting accuracy in your food diary. Number 2 is not tracking everything. All right, so whether it's lack of awareness, which is usually the case if you've never done any kind of like a cleaner, like, so I want to call it a clean eating plan. You know, we've all kind of, well, I shouldn't say we've all, but the majority of people have been through a phase in their life where like, I'm cleaning up my diet, and you remove a lot of things. When you've never done that before, you don't realize how little things add up. Okay. Or maybe you just don't think that those 100 calories here and there add up, but they do. Okay. So not tracking everything. Often common things that I see missed are things like coffee creamer, or sugar, oil when cooking, or even cooking spray if used too heavily, little extras throughout the day. So like you're making your meal and like you're popping a few in your mouth while you're making it, eating off of kids' plates. These are all very common things. All right. So, or maybe you're over on your macros and you don't want to track the stuff that's going to make you go over. All of that stuff ends up adding up. Another common error I see is when you don't have nutrition facts. Like, I have been doing this long enough to pretty much have a rough idea of what an ounce of protein has in terms of protein grams. You know, like knowing that stuff. If you don't have that stuff in your bank account here, up here, in your brain account, I'll call it, you do want to do a little bit of research, because sometimes the apps that you're using aren't very accurate. So for instance, MyFitnessPal, notorious for if you type in like chicken breast, you'll get 10,000 different chicken breast options. And you're like, which one is the right one? Okay. Also, I would highly recommend Macros First. Macros First, if you don't already use Macro First and you would like to try Macros First, use code FitBodyRx and it will give you a 2-week premium trial. Super easy to use, very user-friendly. I love the fact that all of the, little plug for Macros First, all of the, like every entry has all of the different measurements. Always go in like grams or ounces to keep it simple for yourself, but making sure that you are using accuracy when you're tracking things. This is also common for people that are newer to this. You'll type in like, here's an example I just had this in my head, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and they just find some generic entry. No, like, wheat bread, white bread, you know, how big were the slices, how much peanut butter, how much jelly. You got to take the components and weigh the components and put it all in there. The more ingredients, the more you have to do, right? Okay, so we want to make sure that you are doing accuracy with your tracking. Another common issue is just eating out too often. All right, so when we eat out, the majority of what you're eating out, there's a lot of hidden calories from fats. And obviously the portions are going to be very hard to consistently report accurately without having a food scale. And most people aren't bringing a food scale to a restaurant, right? Kind of going to be that oddball, like, let me pull out my food scale while I'm at the restaurant. Not necessarily something you want to bring in your purse, right? So just limiting your eating out can be helpful. And then another one that I think often gets overlooked, but is very, very common, is 2 things. Not being consistent on a weekly basis. So it might be you're tracking like, and you're sticking to your plan, maybe 2 or 3 days, but then there's 2 or 3 days where you're not, or not being consistent long enough. So you've only ever really given it maybe 2 weeks and then like something happened and you've never actually given it a full, 4 to 6 weeks of being consistent to be able to make adjustments. And that's probably the most important thing for everybody, is you need to have that consistency. And then the final thing I think that I feel like is a common issue with macro tracking and food tracking in general is the psychology behind it. So oftentimes people have a lot of guilt and shame when they're not tracking perfectly, when they go over their numbers, when they're tracking things that they can't be perfect with, when they're tracking foods they don't think they should be having. And none of that stuff is helpful. All right. We should be looking at food tracking like it's just data. We are tracking data so that we don't have to worry about guesswork and frustrations, and we're getting all of the things that we need. So these are common errors on your end. If you're like reading and you're listening to this and you're like, nope, none of that is me. Okay. Now we're going to go into the next step. All right. Because this is where we actually have to figure out, because even if your tracking is perfect, if this part isn't covered, this is going to keep you frustrated, because now you're doing all of the right things. You're not eating out, you're tracking everything, but things aren't moving. All right. So first and foremost, this is the section that I want you to know is so important for you to be able to have complete control over how you look and how you feel. And this part is adjustable based on how your goals change. All right. And they should be adjustable, because when it comes to calories and macros, those numbers aren't static. Okay. So main thing here, if you're doing all of that stuff, all right, and you're not getting results, it likely means you do not have the right amount of calories, or your macro split is off. I do 100% believe that macro splits are very individualized. Some coaches will tell you macros don't really matter. Just hit your protein and your fiber, and hit your calories. I don't agree with that, because I do think that hormones and training type play a huge factor in how your body responds to different macro splits. Some clients who are less active, have some hormonal dysfunction, do better on a lower carb, higher fat diet. Clients that have a higher intensity in their training, they do tend to push themselves a lot harder, might do better on a lower fat, higher carb diet. Endurance athletes in a cut are going to do better on a lower fat, higher carb diet. Okay. So we want to look at having the right ranges, but also the right calories. Okay. Going to online calculators to setting your macros is not the best way to set your macros. It is a good way to start figuring out where a baseline is, but macros and calorie intake is something that you should take some time to actually set, built in by building a process, or by using a process. It's here is where I'm at. So let me take a step back, because I got a little wordy there. All right. So there's two components to figuring out your calories and macros. You want to know what your current diet and training level looks like. So having like a little bit of a food audit. And then you also want to have a general idea of somebody what with your activity level should be consuming, and seeing where the mismatch is there. And then from there, we want to be tracking data and actually work to kind of match that. And then when we're matching it, figuring out what's going on with our body, what's going on with your weight, what's going on with how you feel, appetite, cravings, energy. And if appetite, cravings, energy are down, and you're where you need to be, maybe then it's, let me try and actually push things up a little bit more, because maybe my needs are a little bit higher than that calculation. If vice versa, you're at that TDEE and you're like, man, I'm feeling bloated, I'm not hungry, my weight's up a couple pounds, maybe that was a little bit of an overshot. Okay, so the calculations should be a general guideline, but not an end all. So we need to know what your individual needs are. Oftentimes, a lot of clients underestimate their total daily energy expenditure, whether it's they're looking at what their Apple Watch or their Whoop Band or their Oura Watch is telling them that they are actually burning, and just so deconditioned to knowing what it feels like to intuitively feed yourself enough food. Other things is not knowing how to adjust with changes in training, activity, or even progress. As you lose weight, or if you gain weight, your activities do change, or your energy needs do change. If your training is changing, whether it's the type of training you're doing, maybe you're doing more. So a lot of clients that I know that are going from like CrossFit to High Rocks may have a little bit higher energy needs as their output is going up. If you have an injury and you're laid up for a little bit, it's not, oh, I gained 20 pounds, so I injured. It's no, I need to adjust my nutrition as my activity level is changing. Okay. So we want to look at that kinds of stuff as well. Oftentimes I also see that, like I mentioned, there's a lot of mismatches in macros based on your needs. And this also comes from a little bit of intuition as well. So I am a big believer in intentional and intuitive eating together. So, and I say that because we can't just be intuitive and expect to make progress, because we are going to intuitively do what we've always done. And that's what's got us where we are right now, right? So if we're looking to change, there's got to be a level of intent. However, we have to be intuitive on how that feels and if we're getting the positive benefits on it. We can't just always be a robot. So I always, when I'm working with my clients, look at what their diet currently looks like, and I'll see where the gaps are, what things need to change, but also kind of channeling or challenging some beliefs about things and making sure that they're getting the right balance of things. And I think the last thing here is, when you are making these adjustments, you want to make sure that we're making small tweaks, not always trying to overhaul things. And that is why I mentioned, when we're looking to set calories and macros, we are always looking to start with, like, let's take a look at what's going on with your nutrition first before making big changes. That usually does help a ton. Okay. So all of this, very, very helpful for you to know. Also knowing, and this is a big problem that I see with macro tracking in general, is, and why a lot of people, maybe you've been successful in the past, but now you can't seem to be successful with the same thing, is if you've only ever tracked in a deficit, or you've been tracking in what you think is maintenance, but it's really it's adaptation, which we're going to talk about next. You get stuck and you feel frustrated because what worked then isn't working now. And we're going to kind of shift into that now. Okay. So the final piece here is that for a lot of people, when they go into macro tracking, it's for one purpose. It's, I really need to lose weight. I want to lose weight. I want to lose body fat. I want to get leaner. And what happens is you do start to make some progress. But if you've been in a calorie deficit for too long, metabolic rate does go down. Appetite does creep up. You'll often see a stall in progress. Maybe you're a little bit hungrier. Maybe your energy is a little bit lower. Maybe you're a little bit more injury prone. All of these things happen. On a hormonal perspective, what we're seeing is changes in things like your leptin levels, your thyroid hormones, your cortisol levels. And these things are all going to impact your motivation. It's going to impact your gym routine or your gym sessions. It's going to impact everything. And the solution here is usually what most clients don't want to hear, is that you truly do need to spend some time eating at maintenance. And I think the biggest misconception here is, like, a lot of people overthink the whole reverse dieting thing. Most people are not so far away from maintenance as they think. Unless you are truly metabolically adapted, in which case you would probably be walking around like a zombie most days. And this might be you. I feel like a zombie every day. My hormones are off. I don't poop. I have no energy for my workouts. I barely show up anymore. Those are all metabolic adaptations. And that's a sign of severe metabolic adaptation. You'll see levels in thyroid function, in a lot of your different hormone functions go down on labs. But in this case, what happens is, as you make adjustments, things start improving and you start burning more calories. For most people, it's just that they've been chronically underfed by about 300 to 400 calories. And just by adding those calories back in, you don't need a big drastic, or you don't need a very slow, gradual, like 50 calories per week thing. By just adding in a little bit quicker, your body catches up a little bit quicker. You normally will feel pretty good. So once you get yourself into a place where, like, metabolically everything's, I say it's like you're turning all the lights on in the house. Once everything's turning on, your body's burning a lot of energy, right? Because if all the lights are on in the house, guess what? I'm burning up a lot of electricity, right? That's what you want here. We want everything turned on. That's when it's easier for you to make progress. Okay. So that's some of the things that I wanted you guys to know. Really big, 3 big pieces here, 3 big sections. Number 1 is, if you're tracking and you're not making progress, making sure that you're troubleshooting anything on your end that might be off. Like the food tracking is really important. Okay. Having a system there. Number 2 is making sure that you have the right calories and macros for you. Calories matter, macros matter more. And then number 3 is making sure that you haven't been eating at these calorie deficits or this calorie deficit macros for too long, which might be negatively impacting your metabolic rate. Okay, so those are 3 big things that you want to really focus on. And a couple of things that I wanted to just kind of touch on here are some myths that might happen, myths that you might have heard about macros. And I think that this is stuff that I really try and change with the way that I approach things with my clients, because like I mentioned, one of the things I am about, you should not be eating by numbers. Nobody should be eating by numbers. Numbers are a guideline. We should always be eating by plates and just cross-checking with numbers. That's how it should be. Hey, breakfast is, I'm going to have protein's going to be yogurt. Carbs is going to be, I don't know, oatmeal. Fats are going to be some peanut butter, right? We have our macros, and then we can talk about micros. We're not going to do that today. But we're looking at, okay, I'm going to plug that in to my app, and it tells me, all right, if I have 200 grams of Greek yogurt, that's 15 grams of protein. My oats, that's about 30 grams of carbs. The berries that I'm going to add about 10 more grams of carbs. The nut butter is about 15 grams of fat. So you can kind of see the balance of that meal, right? And at the end of the day, you could take a look at, okay, like this number or this meal wasn't high enough in protein. Maybe I need a little bit bigger portions. Now you're learning things. And we're going to talk about this stuff in my next episode. But one of the things that I want to bust as far as myths go is that your macros need to be perfect. Okay. Like, I will be honest, I am the least perfectionist with macros. I give my clients very big ranges, and I focus on, do their meals look mostly balanced? Like, that's the main thing. All right. So for most of you guys, you have to realize that real life means you're going to have a lot of variables. Sometimes you might have a higher fat breakfast and a lower fat lunch. It all averages out, right? But I do look at the balance of your meals, making sure you're getting a little bit of everything at your meal so that you're feeling satiated. Number 2 is that a lot of people get stuck in this thing of, I have to track my food forever. And that should not be the case. If you like tracking your food, track your food. I'm a tracker. I track a lot of data though. I'm a data nerd. I'm trying to get better about tracking my finances right now, but I do track my food. I don't track it with obsession though. I'm not about being perfect. I mostly just keep tabs of things. In fact, that's helped me a lot because right now I'm actually changing up my nutrition to gain a little bit of weight, going into a surplus. So it's easy for me to adjust because I know where I'm currently at. Okay. So you don't have to track your food forever, but it is a tool. It builds awareness, and it will allow you to always have something to go back to if things aren't going in the right direction. And then I think the last myth is that if you're not losing weight, that it's not working. Okay. So if you are truly doing all of the right things, it should be working. If it's not working, it means that there's something off with the amount that you're eating, or there's other inputs that might be impacting the only data point you're looking at, which is the scale. Okay. So we want to know how to track trends on the scale and know when to make adjustments to things. All right. So it's not so much about your daily data points. It's how your daily data points add up over time. And we're looking at trends and seeing where your calories have been and your macronutrients have been and making adjustments to that stuff as well. Okay. But things like sleep, stress, metabolism, your training, inflammation, where you're at in your cycle, all of that stuff is going to matter. So we want to make sure we're looking at all of that kinds of stuff. Okay. So now I want to give you guys some just practical takeaways here for you guys to leave with as I'm closing up shop today. A couple of things that might help you to get started is if you're like, man, I'm not tracking, but I've stopped tracking because I wasn't making progress. The first thing that I would do, and this is even if you are tracking, is get away from numbers at all right now. Like, just get away from looking at numbers and focusing on meal structure and how many times a day you like to eat, along with balanced meals. All right. So like focusing on those 3 things. So maybe it's, I wake up hungry. I have to eat first thing. And then I get hungry around 10 a.m. And then I'm hungry around 12. And then I'm hungry around 4. And then I'm hungry around 6. So you like to eat 5 times a day. All right. How much at each meal do you need to eat to keep you satisfied until your next meal? Right. So looking at that next. All right. So we're looking at the basic stuff there and not even thinking about what some app tells you that you should be eating or what you think you should be eating or worried about anything. And just track and build meals based on the amounts of foods that feels good to your body. All right. Track your patterns, track your feedback. If you do that, that will help you a ton. Also, how much does your food vary from day to day? All right. Are you someone that's like, I eat pretty much the same thing all week, or are you changing things from day to day? And then the next thing from there is we will be able to take that data and assess where you are and where you want to be. Okay, so here's where you're at. Where do you want to get to? Here's what your nutrition looks like. Here's what your goals are. We can match things together, figuring out what your body actually needs to make progress happen. Okay, so I want to know from you where you feel like you might be missing some things in your nutrition. Is it accountability on what you're actually tracking because you get maybe overwhelmed, burned out, stressed about it? All right, so those things. Is it not knowing how much you should be eating? Or have you been tracking for a long time, eating at these same calories for a long time, and they're no longer working? Because one of those three things are probably the pitfall that's keeping you stuck, and I want to be able to help you with that stuff. All right, so in my next episode, I am going to talk about some strategies to make it easier for you guys to track food without feeling obsessive, some strategies I give my clients for doing things like family meals and stuff like that to be able to help you guys. And I am going to be starting a jumpstart for those of you guys looking to get your nutrition in check and you are interested in learning how to use macros, or you're interested in looking at how I do things a little bit differently. It's going to be starting in February. So if you do want to jump in on that, I will be putting more details out on that on my social media. But that's all I have for today. I'm going to just pop over to see if there's any questions about things. Let me just see. No, but I do see a lot of people on here. If any of you guys do have any questions about anything, please feel free to pop it up on the chat here, whether you're on Instagram or YouTube or Facebook. Anybody have any questions? No? All right. Watch, the second I say I'm going to sign off, somebody's going to have a question for me. But I don't see any right now. So I am going to sign off. If you guys do get any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. I also am going to drop the Macros First app in the show notes for you guys. If you guys do want to give that app a try. I do like that app for tracking food because I find that the database for my clients, especially if you're newer to it, is the most accurate. It makes it pretty easy to track things. And that's the one that I use. It's also very easy to create recipes. So Macros First. If you use code FitBodyRx, you can get I think it's a 2-week premium trial. So, all right. I am going to sign off. I hope you guys all have an amazing day, and I will talk to you guys all on the next episode. Bye.